And welcome back to part two of Japan. And in this video, I'm going to be showing you some pictures, images, and some videos of what Japan is like, what it looks like, some things maybe you know about Japan, or maybe some things that you didn't realize that you knew about Japan. But like I've said before, Japan is a very, very interesting and a very uh, it's a very exceptional country, but they're very different than us in a lot of ways, and very similar to us in a lot of ways. They've really adopted a lot of things that we do. We've adopted a lot of things that they do. A great example of that is how many of you in this quarantine have had ramen noodles, right? Ramen noodles come from Japan, and there's kind of a history of where that all comes from and all that in Japan. So we'll talk about some of that. But Japan is a fascinating culture. It's a fascinating island. And something that they take a lot of pride in is their exceptionalism, them being exceptional. It's a very similar thing to America. America takes a lot of pride in the idea that we are an exceptional culture, that we're an exceptional country. And Japan is very similar in that regard. But Japan is unlike us in that it is a country that has its own language, its own ethnic group, its own specific singular culture. And it has thousands of years of history, hundreds and hundreds of years of history. I don't know, thousands of years of history, depending on how you want to look at it. But yeah, let's get right into it. So in Japan, let's look at some stuff real quick. So in Japan, let's look at Japan. Here it is. And this is the island of Japan. It's shaped like a J, so it's very easy to find it on a map, shaped like a J. Right off the coast of China, East Asia, and here right next to the Korean Peninsula, which we'll talk about in section 2, North and South Korea together as one Korean Peninsula, but right off the Sea of Japan, which is named after them. And Japan has several large islands which you'll get to know in this section. But it is densely populated. It's one of the most densely populated countries in the world. Japan has a population of about, I want to get it right, I don't want to shoot off the top of my head. It has a population of something like 150 million people. 130 million people. So, and that's probably bigger now. That's what the book says. So you could probably go ahead and add a couple million more to that. But 130 million people in a country that's made up of islands about the size of California. If you look at it, it's about similar in size to California. So very densely populated in Japan, like we've said, and it has one of the largest, if you, depending on how you want to look at it, the largest urban area in the world, largest city in the world is Tokyo. Tokyo is a massive city, and we can go back and forth and say, well, actually, depending on this and that, this city's bigger. But most times when people do ask, what's the biggest city in the world? Tokyo is. I mean, you can make a very good argument for it being the biggest city in the world. And I know you might be saying, like, why isn't there just a clear answer there? Well, there's a lot of things that go into that. Why it's under, why that's under, I guess, in an argument, like who argues that? But anyways, here's Japan. Look at that pagoda architecture there, similar that you will find in a lot of places in Asia. You can see cherry blossoms all throughout Japan. That is one of their national symbols, cherry blossoms. And also one of the national symbols is this thing you see in the back. This is a great picture, by the way, right here. This image of Japan right here is fantastic. You got cherry blossoms. You got this pagoda style architecture. I believe that is the palace of the Emperor of Japan. And then in the background, you've got the national symbol of Japan, Mount Fuji, the most mountain-looking mountain that you could think of, right? I mean, it looks like I drew it. It's like, hey, draw a mountain real quick. And there you go. That's Mount Fuji. So Mount Fuji and cherry blossoms, those are two of their national symbols, kind of like their national identity. You also see these all around the country. These are these gates associated with the folk religion of Shinto, which we talked about. Shinto, again, is the religion that is indigenous. It's originally from Japan. Many people are Shinto there. Has a lot in common with a lot of kind of folk religions, spiritualism, Eastern religion, Eastern philosophies, and of course Buddhism. Zen Buddhism is popular throughout Japan as well. But you will see these gates everywhere throughout Japan. They are a symbol of the entrance to a holy or sacred place. So, they can be anywhere. And this is the interesting thing about Shinto, is that Shinto places can be considered holy that aren't necessarily like what we would think. So when we talk about a holy place or a holy space, we tend to think of like a church or a graveyard maybe, or like some sacred spot. But in Shinto, places like a beach, or places like a spring, or a temple, or a shrine, or stuff like that. But places can be holy, and this is the idea: is they are kind of entryways to the spiritual realm, in a way, or where the spiritual realm meets the natural realm. And I know that's weird to talk about, like that sounds really out there and really like crazy, but Shinto and Eastern religion, you got to remember, is very different than Western religion. What we have, the Judeo-Christian, Islamic religions, all kind of tend to be very similar to one another, even though they are different. They generally tend to have similar ideas, thoughts, even characters. Whereas Eastern religions like Shinto, Buddhism, totally different, totally different. So that is some things you'll see all throughout Japan, these gates. So yeah, that is their president. He's wearing a mask there. And here's their flag. This is the flag of Japan. Man, short, sweet, and to the point. It is, that's supposed to be the sun. And Japan is known as the land of the rising sun, because the sun rises in Japan before it rises pretty much anywhere else, with the exception of Pacific Islands. That's because the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and Japan is further east than anywhere else. So it greets the new day before most other countries, if you think about it. So they are the empire of the sun. They are the land of the rising sun, as they call themselves. And this is also a flag that you'll see. It's more of a military flag or a naval flag that you'll see in Japan, but that also is one of their kind of identity flags. But Japan, very simple flag, white with a red dot. Oh, well. And here's some more things of Japanese culture. I just want to show you, like here's some very, very traditional Japanese clothing. You see the woman on the right, she has kind of that geisha kind of makeup and clothing, and the man on the left, I don't know this for sure, but that guy might be somebody of importance. He might be the emperor or something like that. But obviously Japan too, in recent years, ever since World War II ended, Japan has gotten famous for their developments of technology and their obsession or fascination with animation, which most people call anime. Japanese anime, things like Pokemon and Power Rangers and all that kind of stuff. What's some of the other ones? I don't know. Naruto and all that stuff. So yeah, it is. Anime is hugely popular among kids and adults, believe it or not, all throughout Japan. And Japanese pop music, which they call J-pop, which is really, really popular. If you want to look that up, you can look that up on your own. I have no interest in listening to it, but sorry, it's not for me. Yeah, this is Japanese culture, and Japanese culture is also influenced by this idea of collectiveness, that everyone lives in a very, very small area together, and everyone really is kind of in tune with that, in that people are very aware of the greater good of everybody. Japanese people tend to, culturally speaking, Japanese people tend to put their family first, the the honor of the family, the honor of their people, their family, their people they're associated with first. And unlike America, failure is really not an option in Japanese culture for a long time. I mean, it's starting to change now. The idea that you can, that things can go, bad. You can fail at something, but for a long time, this idea in Japanese culture was absolutely forbidden. Like, the idea that you fail at something, that you don't do well at something. The famous thing is death before dishonor, right? People know that about the Japanese, death before dishonor, save face. People say save face all the time. That comes from Japan. And of course, that culture is changing. America has a lot of influence on Japan, and we have since the end of World War II, where we helped to rebuild them. And of course, that caused us to have a lot of influence on their culture. So here is, speaking of World War II, here is the city of Hiroshima. Hiroshima is one of the two cities that have, in history, that have had a nuclear weapon dropped on them. The atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima in 1945, and it absolutely decimated, just destroyed the city. In an instant, thousands of people were killed, and the city has been rebuilt, but they have left certain things as a memorial, as a testament to what happened there, as a callback to not let this type of thing happen ever again. And obviously we talked about what happened there in Japan and what happened, with World War II in the last video. But these are some of the images. This was the bomb, the bomb called Little Man or Little Boy. It was dropped by a B-29 bomber in 1945, named Enola Gay, and it dropped it on the city of Hiroshima, and instantly thousands and thousands of people were killed. So it's a terrible thing in history, but as we talked about in the last video, the Americans saw it as a necessity, that it had to be done in order to save lives, and that's the story we're going with. And that's you can make an argument for that. That's had we invaded the mainland of Japan, it could have cost millions of American and Japanese lives combined, fighting for every inch of ground as they did on islands like Okinawa during World War II. But, we will never know. But World War II did thankfully end. And just, unfortunately for the Japanese, it was very devastating to their cities. So here's Mount Fuji again, to kind of change gears. Here's Mount Fuji, national symbol or icon of Japan. It kind of is similar in the way that Mount Rushmore maybe is a symbol or an icon of the United States, or maybe something like the Grand Canyon is, or something like that. The Gateway Arch, maybe, but see, that's man-made. This is a natural national symbol, natural and national, and it is part of their mythology. This is Mount Fuji is one of these sacred places. The entire mountain is considered to kind of be like a sacred place in Shinto. You can kind of think about, if you know anything about Greek gods and goddesses, right? And it's, Mount Olympus was considered to be holy and sacred. So maybe think like that. Something you maybe know about Japan, sushi, right? Sushi comes from Japan. If you like sushi, it is raw fish. So if you like sushi, you're into sushi, that is from Japan. Also, hibachi, if you guys like Japanese steakhouses, if you like yum yum sauce, if you like Little Tokyo or Inaho or any of those places, that is Japanese food. If you've ever been there and you like that, hey, you like Japanese food. So yes, those places are great, delicious. Who doesn't love Japanese steakhouses, hibachi style, where they cook in front of you, fried rice and teriyaki chicken and all that stuff? That is very much Japanese. So if you're into that, that's from Japan. So here is origami, another thing. Some of you guys in your homework, when you did your reading, you talked about origami and how you liked reading about origami. Origami is the art of folding paper. And it is, it is crazy because people can do all kinds of crazy things. There you go. There's Pikachu. A rose, a dragon. It's the art of folding paper, and there people can get just incredible at this. It's one of those disciplines, though. This is it's such a Japanese thing because it's something that Japanese people, and I'm not talking broadly as like a race type thing, but just like culturally speaking, the Japanese take a lot of pride in work. They take a lot of pride in the idea of working hard and overworking, committing yourself to one thing, being really good at one thing. Don't just do something if you're not going to really commit to it. I think that that's fair to say that is a very Japanese, point of pride. And you see this in things like origami, where enormous amounts of work and dedication are put into something, and it's pretty amazing. I can't do it. I always screw up one of the steps, and the whole thing falls apart and doesn't work. Talking about history here, we talked about this samurai, right? Samurai were the warriors of ancient Japan that, believe it or not, were around all the way up until the 1860s, which is crazy to think about. 1860s, when we were fighting the Civil War. Actually, it was, about 1860s. Yeah, 1850s, 1860s, when they were still around. And that's just crazy. These guys, the sharpest, most reliable, most dense swords in the world, the best swords in the world are from Japan. They're called katanas, right? And extremely sharp. And they're what the Japanese were famous for having. And these samurai were knights, soldiers that fought under a lord called a shogun. And the shogun owned land and had certain politics, and it was this whole thing which we discussed, that whole system, the Japanese feudal system, in the last video. So here's, of course, in some of these pictures, a lot of this is like a lot of the anime and that kind of stuff, but there are actual pictures of these guys. Like, for example, this one right here, this is actual photograph, and it's been colorized, of some samurai, the warrior class. And here's another image that I like of a samurai, and these were kind of the elite. And when the world started to change in Japan, when industrialism came in, these guys were basically ousted from power. Their ways were kind of kicked out. They were criminalized to carry their swords, which was a symbol of their honor and their position. They were forced to cut their hair, which is again part of their position and part of their honor and all that kind of stuff. And their power was basically stripped from them. It's really interesting stories that went on with the samurai and in the country updating. You got to also think about this, and we said this in the last video. The Japanese from 1840 to 1840, 1860, somewhere in there between 1840 and 1860 until 1900. They went from being a country that was so underdeveloped, that was still, like still living in medieval type society. And then within a period of about 50 years, 40 years, they became one of the most powerful countries in the world. Going from being completely, backwards in terms of where the world was in terms, and I don't mean that negatively. I mean that just like they weren't developed. They didn't have any industry. They didn't have any economic power. They didn't have any military power in terms of competing with something like the United States or Great Britain or France or Germany or Russia. And just 40 to 50 years later, they became one of the most powerful countries in the world. They defeated a European power in Russia. It's just amazing. It speaks a lot of volumes towards the Japanese people and how dedicated they are once they all commit to something, when they put their will towards something. The amazing things that they can do. After World War II, the country's completely destroyed. The economy's completely destroyed. And within 10 years, they're creating the greatest, technology in the world. They're creating, high technology industries. They're creating cars. They're creating televisions and all that kind of stuff. And that's just in 10 to 20 years. So it's pretty impressive. And here's Tokyo. Tokyo is one of the most densely populated places in the world. And this is Tokyo. Here it is. Very, very busy city. And in Tokyo, you'll find these capsule hotels. Remember, space is an issue in Japan, right? Space, not having enough room. You can find hotels in Japan where you just get a little capsule. You just get a little, like a little tube, and you get to sleep in it. This is totally normal, these capsule hotels, where you'll find just enough room for you to kind of sleep. These businessmen, this is very common for businessmen traveling to stay in. And Japan, again, there's not this emphasis a lot of times on the individual. And there's this kind of minimalist tendency throughout the country to just kind of, whatever you need, as long as it's not taking up the needs of everybody else. So capsule hotels, they're very, very popular. And it's just, it's funny looking because it's just a capsule. It's like there's a TV in there, as you can see. You can close this little door and then you're in there by yourself. It's like a little sleeping pod. All right, sumo. So let's talk about sumo. Sumo is like their national sport. The rules of sumo are, and by the way, sumo wrestlers eat about 10,000 calories a day, which is crazy. They are these massive athletes, super strong. And there's also a lot of pageantry and tradition that goes along with sumo. And you'll see Shinto priests a lot of times involved in these. And there's a lot of pageantry. There's a lot of symbolism. There's a lot of things that go on. Yeah. But it's hard. It's wrestling. The first person to get knocked out of the ring loses. If you get knocked out of the ring, you lose. And of course, there's belts that you can win, just like regular wrestling. And of course, there's all this beforehand where they kind of show out to each other and do all this formal ritual. And then, of course, we're going to fight. You can see this, like the referee is in traditional clothing. Very traditional, very, very long legacy of how this all works. Watch these guys. So much tradition. And then they just bowl each other around. If you get thrown on the ground or thrown out of the ring, you lose. Oh! Look at that. Still in. Who's going to win? Who you got? Who you got? I got this guy. Yep, there he is. He won. So that is sumo. That is the national sport or the cultural sport of Japan. Now, in terms of other people, like the average person, baseball, and some of you guys wrote about this, baseball is hugely popular nowadays in Japan. Baseball is one of those cultural things the United States kind of exchanged to Japan, especially after World War II. There are a number of Japanese players in the major leagues now, mostly pitchers. But there is, Japan, baseball's huge in Japan for you baseball guys. It is something that the Japanese have really latched onto, and they actually have some of the biggest fan followings. Some of these teams have massive fan clubs and fan groups that are very, very involved with their teams in Japan. Switching gears here, let's talk about some art and stuff like that. So this is woodblock carving. I'm just going to show you some of this. So in woodblock carving, if you read about it, they actually, it's more carving than it is painting, but it's considered a type of painting or art, if you will, where they carve out the block first. So you've got to carve out that, and then it's basically printed. You take the paint and you roll it on the wood block there that you carved, and you get it the paint all on it, and then you're going to take, there you go, you can just watch him. Again, everything in Japan is very much, there's a lot of pageantry, there's a lot of symbolism, there's a lot of ritual that goes into everything as well. They are an attention to detail culture for sure. And there is a way to do everything. Look, see, there it is. He has made the print. And there it is. And then what they're going to do is they're going to add color. So then each step you layer the color on to the same thing. And as you see, as it goes on, they're going to add more and more color. And then he's going to hand color it with watercolors. I don't want to sit here and watch the entire thing, but you can see the idea. And slowly, bit by bit, they're transferring the color onto the whole thing, to the point where at the end, you're going to have these prints, these different woodblock prints. And it's really, really neat. It's a traditional style of artwork. And another style of art is the art of theater. Kabuki theater is the traditional theater of Japan. It just sounds like, you know, what you think of when you think of Japan. These ancient instruments. And this is old. I mean, this isn't like what you and I would go necessarily to. It's kind of like if you were to go to an opera, or if you were to go to like an old Shakespearean play. Okay, so it's not like everybody in Japan is just like nuts about kabuki. I don't want you to think that, but this is the traditional way of theater. And you've probably seen stuff like this in movies or TV, or at least maybe you've seen where they allude to it, or, you know, this probably isn't totally foreign to you. You've probably seen something like this. But kabuki is a very Japanese form of theater. A lot of ritual, there's a lot of kind of things you just have to know about it and how it works. A lot of makeup there. They can be serious, they can be comedies as well. There are comedy plays, just like, you know, Shakespeare wrote comedies way back then. There are comedy kabuki plays. I'm not sure what this one is, but I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of it. And then this is these two last things I'm going to show you here are two of the things that I kind of just think are funny. First of all, this is a game called Botashi. This is played among military academies in Japan. It's a Japanese sport, and Botashi is the idea of, you know, Japan has huge numbers, right? They have massive population in a small area. So the way the game is played is two teams of roughly around 100. I think they can play 50 against 50, or usually it's 100 against 100. And it's a very simple concept. Both teams have a pole, and they take turns. One team, when it's their turn, they try and keep the pole up, and the other team is trying to tear the pole down, and then they switch sides. And the other team now goes and tries to tear down the pole that the other team's trying to hold up. So watch this. The white team will be defending the pole. At first, you can see they're bowing to each other. Again, pageantry, symbolism, pageantry, all that kind of stuff. They're going to put up this pole. There's a lot of strategy that goes into this. It's a big deal in these Japanese academies to play this game. And I feel like you will love this. The guy at the top is called the ninja, which, by the way, ninjas are from Japan. We all know what ninjas are. You They are ancient Japanese assassins, but this guy at the top is called the ninja, and he's the one who protects the pole. He's kind of like the last line of defense. And you can see they're all supporting the pole. This is full contact. And you will see the other team, the blue team, coming in here. Here they come. Vicious. Look at this. It's the first wave. And they're going to get in there. Look at how they, and then the next wave comes just up their backs, going after the pole. Look at this. Look at them fighting. I mean, they're just going after it. And the guy at the top just kicking folks in the head. Unreal. And they just pull them down like a group of zombies or something. And they're going to try and pull that pole down. Now the pole has to get past a certain degree, a certain angle for them to win. You only have a certain amount of time to get the pole down. If they don't get the pole down in a certain amount of time, then the defending team gets a point. And they just go back and forth. They take turns. Looks like they got it past the point. They're going to get a point. There it is. Yep. Now they would take turns. They flip. That is called botashi, and it is nuts. All right, another competition that you will find in Japan, and this is the last thing, the other competition, I think I may have showed some of you this, is there is a lot of, we've talked about, there's a lot of attention to detail. The idea of precision is very important in Japan. The idea of being prim and proper and correct and together, unified, is something that the Japanese, culturally are, they love. This is a precision walking. This is what some schools compete in. It's not necessarily a sport. It's more like a competition, but watch these guys. They're very good. You can see there's spectators all there too. One thing they don't lack is a crowd. They have someone giving them commands. Look how quickly and efficiently they all follow the commands. Then they're going to put on their jackets. And they're going to turn it up to 11 here. Oh, are they going to run into each other? No. Wow. Oh, reverse. Wow. Oh, running. Whoa. Good day. Let's see here. They do some other stuff real quick. Oh. You can look that kind of stuff up on your own, but there's all kinds of crazy stuff when it comes to Japan. A lot of people think it's really funny. If you've ever seen the show MXC, Most Extreme Challenge, it's the precursor to Wipeout. And that's a Japanese show and it is absolutely hilarious. And of course, Japanese game shows are notorious for being crazy and funny and silly. You can look those things up. Just Google Japanese game show. You usually will find something pretty funny. So that is the end of watching that part, seeing that kind of stuff. And you'll have some more stuff. I'll be sending out some other videos on Japan to watch. Japan is a fascinating country, and it's if you commit to this stuff is good stuff. And at the end of the day, guys, you're gonna we're gonna have to commit to this distance learning thing. I know it's hard, but you get out of it what you put into it. So read the selections, watch the videos. I'm not asking too much of you, but it's really interesting stuff, and it's fun to know about the world around us and to kind of have a broader horizon about what the world's like outside of Eatonton, Georgia. So anyways, so I hope you enjoyed that. You can Google some of that stuff on your own. If you find something, you can send it to me, and we can talk about it. And other than that, keep up the good work, and miss you guys. See you later.